hi to everyone who's had an opportunity to be with us. My name is Danielle Williams. I'm the Assistant Vice Chancellor and Director of Equal Opportunity Compliance. And I am happy that you all are able to join us today to talk about the topic that's been really relevant in our community today, COVID-19, and looking at it from a diverse perspective. So COVID-19 and looking at debunking the myths about the vaccine and how it affects the diverse communities. So, what we're in hopes that you'll be able to get a lot of information from our medical professionals today. So, with that being said, I wanted just a couple of disclaimers. Next slide, please. Just being mindful that the presentation today is not considered any type of medical advice that you need to consult with your own medical professionals related to anything related to COVID-19 or the vaccine. So we want to ensure that you are aware of that. And then also being mindful too, for those that may want a copy or be able to review this video again, it will be available when the session is over on the Equal Opportunity and Compliance website for additional viewing. So we want to ensure that you all are aware of that. So again, we appreciate you for being here. Next slide, please. We appreciate you for being here today and being attentive as you hear from our wonderful medical professionals. So now I'm going to turn it over to Laura Jacobs to do a welcome and introduce our speakers.
Thank you, Danielle. Welcome, and thank you all for joining us today. It is my honor to be with you, not only to bring greetings, but to introduce this distinguished group of panelists for today's webinar. We have seen since the earliest days of the pandemic that the virus has disproportionately impacted Black, Indigenous, and people of color on every dimension. Locally, the statistic bore out with higher infection rates and hospitalizations among the Latinx and Marshallese communities, for example. A map I just saw published online by Johns Hopkins University shows the US states that have released COVID-19 data broken down by race in 3 critical categories: confirmed cases, deaths, and testing. The importance of these data being released publicly is they shed light on the intersecting forces of race, underlying condition, and factors about how the virus spreads throughout the US. Now we have a vaccine. Today we'll hear more about people's reasons for taking it or not. This panel has tons and tons of great data to share with you. And that's the purpose of this panel today. It's to share data so that you can make your own decisions. Danielle's office could not have assembled a better panel to provide factual and experiential information about COVID-19. And with that, I'm pleased to introduce the panel. Dr. Huda Sharaf is the medical director of the Pat Walker Health Center at the U of A. She's a fellow of the American College of Physicians and has been among the leaders of our campus COVID response and chief advisor in the development of campus safety protocols, including testing, isolation, quarantine, et cetera. We also are pleased that Dr. Derrick Gray has been able to join us. He is a family and preventative medicine physician, assistant professor, and associate program director of education at University of Arkansas for Medical Sciences. We also have Ms. Dana Fields. She is an advanced practice nurse and family nurse practitioner and a recently new addition to the Pat Walker Health Center. Your Q&A facilitator today is Ms. Emily Chin Manivong, and she is program coordinator for Walton Global Engagement at Walton College. And with that, I will turn it over to Dana, who will kick off today's discussion. Dana?
Hello, and thank you for that wonderful introduction. And also want to thank OEOC for highlighting this much needed topic. Next slide. Unfortunately, I have to start this presentation off with something people might think is like doom and gloom, but I wanted to be able to show the death rates of people within the minority communities. And as you can see, if you look at the times when we had these spikes in deaths in around the right before March to May area, some of the highest death rates were first of all, the top one was the African American community, and second was the Hispanic or Latinx community. Then things kind of tapered off a little bit, and then of course we had the other spike from November to January, and there we saw one constant, which was within the Latinx community. There was still at a high rate of deaths, and this is deaths per 100,000 in the population. And then the second one that we noticed were the Native American or American Indian population where there was a spike. And this was, I just kind of want us to kind of keep that in mind as you go on throughout the presentation. I want you to know that this presentation is not to promote any particular vaccine, and it's not to make you do anything you don't want to do. We want to provide as much information as possible for you to be able to make an informed decision that's best for you and your family members. Next slide. Okay, why do we focus on, why are the purpose of this presentation? Well, there was a survey done in September. In September, and then there was another one done in December, just to kind of test the waters on how people were thinking or feeling about vaccinations. The three questions they asked were, are you absolutely certain or very likely that you would get a vaccine, or somewhat likely or not likely at all? And as you can see that there have been some, the good thing about it is if you look at the September questionnaire, there were 39.4% of people who said that they were absolutely certain that they would get it. Well, the good thing, by December, that increased to 50.3% of those who were surveyed. Somewhat likely, that there was 22.5 who said that they were in December, and then there was a reduction in that, which probably meant that they became absolutely likely or very likely. The not likely also decreased in that time, and so that was good, and there was, when they saw those results. But what we want to focus on, if you go to the next slide, is those who said that they were not likely to get a vaccine. And I want to focus on this area, which is at the bottom where we're talking about it based on ethnicity. If you look in September, the white or non-Hispanic community of those who said that they were white, non-Hispanic community said that they were not, they would not get a vaccine. That started at 35.9 and decreased to 30.3. When we look at the Black non-Hispanic community, the good thing is there was a reduction in December, but if you look, there was 56% compared to the white 35.9%. In the Latinx community, it was 36.4 compared to, of course, we're comparing it to our white counterparts. And then those who said that they were multiple race was 32. The good thing is there was a reduction, so that there was some change of heart for the most part in those communities, but they still at some of a high rate said that they were not likely or had no intent of getting the vaccine. And that's the concern and why we're kind of focusing on these populations today. Next slide, please. Of the group that said that they had no intention of getting the vaccine, I have on the right some of the reasons they said why. These were the reasons that they cited most frequently. 29% were concerned about side effects and safety. What I'm going to do is discuss each of these individually, with the exception of the first one. And the reason I'm not is because Dr. Sharaf is going to cover a lot of the safety and side effect issues in her presentation. But the second one was planning to wait to kind of see if the vaccine was safe or not, lack of trust in the government. And then the fourth concern was that they were concerned that the vaccines were developed too quickly. Next slide. So the first thing I'm going to address is the lack of trust of the government. And I'm talking about this not to increase hesitancy, but to acknowledge that this lack of trust is not unwarranted. We have history that shows that in underserved populations, there have been some disparity, I guess, in treatment. And one thing that I wanted to highlight was within the Latinx community, there was a forced sterilization of Spanish-speaking women in Los Angeles. And what happened there was women had gone in to have their babies, and when they came out with sterilization. They were sterilized or had issues. And this was from like 1965 to 1978. This was a study that was found. So we know that there's concern based on these type of things, but I'm going to talk a little later about why this is a little different. And then another one I want to highlight was the Henrietta Lacks. I don't know if a lot of people know about her. She was an African-American woman in 1951 who went into Johns Hopkins. She went there because she was having some abnormal bleeding, but was found that she had cervical cancer and it was pretty aggressive. She did receive treatment. However, they took a biopsy of her cancer, and though they had been trying to do research on cancer for a long time, but they were not able to keep cancer cells alive. Well, the researcher there realized that the cells from Miss Lack's cancer, it was just prolific. It doubled every 20 to 24 hours. And so the importance of that, what happened there was that these cancer cells were sent all over the world, and they were used to advance research. They actually were used in helping with the polio vaccine. The problem with it was that in both of these cases, these women nobody asked them for consent, and they were kind of singled out. Henrietta Lack's family didn't find out. This happened in 1951 when she went to the doctor, and unfortunately she did pass away. But it wasn't until 1975 that her family found out that they had used these cells and they had been using it for years. And actually, they still use these cells. So a lot of money had been made on this. So we know that there's concern. We know that, and the people in underserved communities are like, I don't know, is this another government scheme? And of course, we have things like Japanese internment camps and things that happen in the Marshallese community that we can look to. But the difference between what's happening now is every time before anyone receives, first of all, this is not a study. The vaccines are not necessarily a study. And the next difference here is that before anyone receives the vaccine, they're always asked to give their consent. And of course, it's not singling one community, one aspect of the community, or just certain races of people. Next slide. And the other ones were that the concern that the vaccine was developed too quickly. It may seem that way because they had to get emergency authorization use and things like that. But I want everyone to know, and again, Dr. Sharaf is gonna go into more detail later on, but both Pfizer and Moderna use the mRNA vaccine. They're both mRNA vaccines. And it's been used for decades. It's not that it's anything new per se. It's just that all of a sudden there was funding to be able to get it out. And again, we'll elaborate on that a little later. And then the other two vaccines, which are the Johnson & Johnson and the, AstraZeneca virus, that is, are viral vector vaccines. And they are, it's been used since the 70s. So again, none of this is new development. Next slide. A lot of people are planning, they're just saying, oh, I'm just gonna wait and see what happens. Well, I just kind of wanted to mention some things. What happens during this time is that while you're waiting, the virus is not. The virus is constantly, their goal is to try to survive. Their goal is to try to make it. So they're constantly, new variants are emerging as we wait to be vaccinated. So, and they're changing so much. So as a matter of fact, in Arkansas, the UK variant, the Brazilian variant, and the California variant have already been found. And we suspect that that's gonna continue because the virus is trying to survive and it keeps changing so that it can do so. I mean, and it's happening so frequently that they've had to have a whole new system in categorizing these viruses, where they kind of have like a checklist, and one of the areas is variants of interest, variants of concern, and variants of high consequence. Right now, we're already we're dealing with variants that are of interest and of concern. The goal is that we don't get to these variants that are of high consequence, because the things that they expect to happen when we deal with those variants are that it's going to be difficult to diagnose them. It's going to be the vaccines that we have are going to become less effective, and then we're going to also have less treatment options for some of these variants. So just think about it as you're kind of waiting to see what happens. You may be dealing with something else by the time you decide to receive a vaccine. Next slide, please. And to this, I wanted you to look at this because initially we looked at the populations that were dying at the highest rates. And so right now I want you to look at the vaccinations that the number of people by race and ethnicity who have gotten at least one dose. If you look, you'll see, of course, the group that has had the most is at 64.7%, and that's the white non-Hispanic population. If you look at where you're seeing the least amount, and it's in the Pacific Islander population and the Native American and the Asian population. So if you can recall earlier, if you noticed that it was, there were some issues with, and especially, and we know locally with dealing with the Marshallese community and how the high death rates that they were having, that's kind of a concern. And then if you look at the next slide, you'll look, it shows, this is nationally, of course, race and ethnicity of people who are completely vaccinated. And another issue, I mean, we can see that it's concerning again, that it's going to be the Pacific Islander and the Native American population that has the least amount. But if you looking at that, you will see that none of the other groups it's not a great turnout compared to the 68.2%. I mean, everyone is pretty much below 10% who have become fully vaccinated. And it's important to see, like when we talked about the death rate, is that Blacks make only 13.4% of the population. Hispanics make up 18.5% of the population, and American Indians 1.3% of the population. So why that's concerning is that if we're dying at higher rates, then it's not at higher rates than the white population. Well, comparatively when it comes to how much they make up in the population. Next slide, please. This is the breakup that we've seen by race in Arkansas. And that's the vaccine data that's noted. And this is specifically Arkansas. The information I gave you earlier was nationally. So as you can see, I mean, I guess in a way we're a little better in some areas. The Native American is vaccinated at 9.9%, Pacific Islander 15.4%, Blacks 26%, and Asians 29.4%, which is a real difference because in nationally that's not happening. And 37.84% in the, at least in the state that's in the white community. Next slide, please. And now I'm gonna hand it over to Dr. Sharaf so she can give you a little more information about each of the vaccines.
Thank you very much, Ms. Fields. I appreciate that. And so again, just to focus on that point is that, you know, while we're having minority groups that are dying in much larger numbers and at a faster rate, we're not seeing that significant amount of vaccination rates in those groups. And so again, I echo what Ms. Fields said earlier, that this presentation is meant to hopefully answer questions and just provide some additional information, evidence-based information, just to make a decision about whether you're going to get vaccinated or not. So my first slide basically discusses the two major types of what's called messenger RNA vaccines, or mRNA vaccines. These are the first two that were actually released in the market in the United States, so Pfizer and Moderna. You'll find here, I've just kind of have a head-to-head comparison of the two vaccines. They're both equally effective, 95% effective. That is fantastic. I mean, this is unheard of in most vaccines, actually, that we have, that you'll have such a high effective rate. With Pfizer, they're both 2-dose vaccines. With Pfizer, it's a dose given 21 days apart. And with Moderna, it's a 2 doses given 28 days apart. The way that they're stored and they're delivered is in just both of them in small vials. It's just a difference of how many doses per vial. Pfizer was the first one that came out, and the difficulty with it was the extreme cold temperatures that were required to store it for it to last until its expiration date. That's actually since changed over the last month or two. There's been added guideline and evidence from Pfizer that it can actually be stored in regular freezer temperatures, but again, maybe just for a couple of weeks, not for months as it can be stored in colder temps. Moderna is in a regular freezer. The thing that I want to emphasize in this slide is the number of participants that were in the trial. I mean, you're not talking about hundreds, you're talking about tens of thousands of people that actually enrolled in these studies. So Pfizer had 36,000 and more, and Moderna had over 30,000. The age is different. With Pfizer, anyone 16 years of age and older can get this, and that's the way it is now in the state of Arkansas. We're in phase 2, so anyone 16 age or older can get Pfizer vaccine, but that's the only one for 16 and 17-year-olds. Moderna is approved for those 18 years and older. I also want you to keep in mind that you reach full vaccination 2 weeks after your second dose of either of these vaccines. And that's what everybody refers to as being fully immunized or achieving full immunity. Currently, Pat Walker Health Center, we just started administering Pfizer vaccine actually this week. And I want to make sure and let the audience know that not only are we able to vaccinate university students, faculty, and staff, we are also now accepting spouses of students, faculty, and staff. All they need to do is call the clinic to get that appointment. So how effective are these vaccines? So let's talk about this. Basically, they looked at two groups, equal sizes, and they followed them. And these are people that were just going about their regular everyday business, going to work, taking care of their kids. They found actually in those people that had received their second vaccine, they found that 9 people got sick. In the group that did not receive any vaccine, they followed these folks for days and weeks, they found that 170 people got sick. Again, this is just to demonstrate how effective these COVID vaccines are. All right, I did have a slide, and I apologize. I had a slide before this, and it was basically a cartoon diagram of coronavirus. I think all of us at nauseam have seen some version of the coronavirus that looks like a sphere with spikes sticking out of it. What's important about that, and I'm going to kind of go through just some basics about how the vaccine works. And I'm doing this to show people that it does not affect your DNA. It does not linger in your blood. This is all misinformation. And so that's kind of why I'm going through the process. The vaccine, and overall, and this is with all of them that you hear about, the goal of the vaccine is to trigger your body to make an immunity army that if it sees the spikes on the coronavirus, it knows to attack it and neutralize it. So we're going to talk a little bit about what that means. And I had this little cartoon of a cell. I thought it made it a little bit easier to stomach and hopefully not as boring. But what happens is you get a shot in your upper arm, and that shot actually has messenger RNA. What messenger RNA is that it's a benign portion. It's an innocent portion of the coronavirus. It does not cause infection. It does not do you any harm. But what it does is it carries the recipe or the blueprints of how to make these little spike proteins you see outside of the virus. So what happens is the messenger RNA injected in the arm, it goes towards a muscle cell. It enters the cell, does not even touch or look at your nucleus where your DNA is. It travels to this factory called a ribosome. They read the instructions, they read the recipe on that messenger RNA. They learn how to make the spike protein. Once they get those instructions, your body destroys the messenger RNA. So it's no longer there. But now the muscle cell has the recipe to make the spike protein. It makes the spike protein, it wants to show off its work, and then puts it on the outside of the cell. So again, that spike protein does not cause COVID-19. It does not cause you to have any type of horrible illness, and it does not interfere with your genetic makeup at all. It does not mess with your DNA. And once that messenger RNA is read by your cell, it is destroyed. Kind of like a spy movie. Once the spies get their next mission, and then basically the mission self-destructs. It's kind of the same thing. Here's another picture again, just to illustrate, just in an infographic, how the shot again is administered in the upper arm. It travels to your muscle cell. Your muscle cell gets the instructions and produces the little spikes on its surface. Your body starts to produce something called antibodies that now knows that these spikes don't belong here. They don't belong in the body. So now the next time you see coronavirus and they see the spikes, they're going to neutralize the virus. That's how all of these vaccines work in one way or another. But again, they do not interfere with the genetic makeup of the person receiving the vaccine. So some common facts and some misinformation. I'd like to tell everyone here, please do not get your information about the vaccine on social media. Please do not get it from Facebook, Instagram, Snap, whatever the case may be. Be sure that what you're reading is based on science and based on evidence. So again, the messenger RNA vaccine cannot give anyone COVID-19. They do not affect or interact with your DNA. It never enters your cell. I always have the little joke that you're not going to become an X-Men. You're not going to start growing an extra arm or leg. It does not interfere with your genetic makeup. This is one I heard actually on social media. But I want to say they do not contain GPS devices so Bill Gates can follow our every move. I've heard that as well. And again, the cell breaks down and gets rid of that messenger RNA in the vaccine, and it is destroyed. It does not linger. It does not cause complications to you. So this is something Ms. Fields alluded to, is messenger RNA, and we hear this a lot. It was created so fast. And you know, anything that's created so quickly, we tend to kind of question and be a little bit skeptical about. But please know that the technology for messenger RNA has actually been around for 20 to 30 years, for decades. Actually, prior to COVID, they were actually using this type of technology to try to create a more effective flu vaccine and also try to create vaccines against Zika and other types of viruses like cytomegalovirus. So why did it happen so fast? So those of you that actually are involved in research, you know that it's more of a relay. You have a group of scientists that work on one portion of the study, and when they're finished, they pass their information and data off to another group, and so on. So it takes a while, and it also takes money. And if you don't get your funding, if you don't get your grants, research can stall and it can stop. Well, because COVID-19 has affected every corner of our world, there were so many people vested and involved in trying to come up with an effective vaccine. So instead of a relay, it was more like a race. You had lots of separate research groups working on the same data, trying to enroll people for vaccine. And the barriers, especially those financial barriers, really did not exist because COVID-19 has affected not only the health of everyone and caused an immense amount of deaths, it has affected this world's financial stability and academics of every country. So everyone has a vested interest in having to see this pandemic end. So again, the research is not new. It has been around for a long time. It was developed in such an efficient manner because so many people were involved. And there was a lot of financial backing behind it, numerous labs that were involved. Johnson and Johnson. Again, I'll talk a little bit about, they all work the same way in triggering your body to make an immune army that recognizes the spikes on the coronavirus. And when faced with a coronavirus particle, they neutralize the virus. Now, with Johnson & Johnson and AstraZeneca, and Dr. Gray will be talking a little bit about the pause with Johnson & Johnson later on in the presentation. But please know that Johnson & Johnson is also Janssen, is also Janssen. They're all the same vaccine, because I get that question a lot. Johnson & Johnson is the big company. They own the pharmaceutical company Janssen or Janssen. But again, if someone says Johnson & Johnson vaccine, it's the same as Janssen vaccine. AstraZeneca is only currently distributed overseas. You will not find that in the United States. With Johnson & Johnson, it was great because it was a single dose. It was not as effective as the mRNAs, but still it was 72% effective, which is great. And again, it was tested against the variants because it came later. It can be stored easily in refrigerator temperatures, and please understand there were 43,000 participants in their trials. It is also only approved for those 18 and over. AstraZeneca is not something we're very familiar with in the US, again, because it was mostly being administered in European countries and in Africa. But it is a 2-dose regimen, wider duration between doses. So side effects, I like to call immune response, occur typically, some people have received the vaccine and had no symptoms. Some people received the first dose, had no symptoms, had some after the second dose. But in all these cases, it typically occurs within 24 hours of getting the vaccine. And in essence, it's just your body telling you that the vaccine is working. Your body is mounting an immune response, making those antibodies, and that can develop some of these symptoms. So the most common ones are, you might have soreness where you got your shot. You might get a headache, a low-grade fever, 99, maybe some chills, some body aches. But it typically resolves with ibuprofen or Tylenol within a day. These symptoms do not typically linger. So this is another question we get. Why should I get vaccinated? I mean, COVID has about a 99% survival rate, you know? So this is not my phrase, but I took it from someone, and it was surviving and thriving are incredibly different. What we do know now is the pandemic has been going on for over a year. And so we're well aware now of the long haulers, the long COVID patients, those complications that continue to linger after this initial infection with the virus goes away. We know that it can affect your lungs, it can affect your heart, it can affect your blood vessels, and it can affect your brain. In your lungs, if people have had pneumonia with it, it can leave behind scarring that can cause people to have difficulties with breathing for the rest of their lives. It can affect the muscles of your heart, cause inflammation in the muscles in your heart. Now, again, this is not with everyone who gets COVID-19, but this is just a risk of those that do get infected, potential long-term complications. If it affects the muscle in your heart, it can affect the way your heart functions. And again, that can lead to chronic long-term problems. It can also increase the likelihood of developing clots in your blood vessels. The actual infection can do that. And the brain, people have had seizures with COVID-19. They found people that had issues with retaining new material after COVID-19 infections. Again, unfortunately, the pandemic has gone on long enough that we do know what some of the long-term effects are. So my slide says vaccine benefit far outweighs any associated risk with the vaccine. And this is even in the setting of what Dr. Gray will be discussing later on in the presentation with Johnson & Johnson. So as Ms. Field stated, history can cause a lot of mistrust. And those are legitimate concerns. But please also know that it can teach us about our successes. This is my first pandemic, all of our first pandemic. I'm hoping it's my last pandemic, but it's not the world's first pandemic. We've been through flu pandemics, polio, measles, smallpox. All of these pandemics have a common solution to the reason they all ended, and it was successful vaccination. We all want to get on the other side of this and return to some type of a normal routine, but it's going to take all of us, or the majority of us, to have immunity against COVID-19. Let's learn from our past successes. I love this cartoon because it reminds me of my mom. And my mom had smallpox vaccine scars. And these are not subtle scars, they're pretty significant. And so I remember asking her why she had that. And she's told me she had been vaccinated against smallpox. And I was like, we never got that. And her response to me was like, because it doesn't exist anymore. The vaccine for smallpox was so effective that it eradicated the disease. And it actually was not administered. I think the administration of smallpox vaccine, I believe, ended in the middle 70s because it was eradicated. There were no more cases. So some perspective, because I still hear people talking about COVID-19 not being any different than flu season and the amount of deaths that our country has seen. So let's take a look at some of these. World War II lasted 6 years, 405,000 American fatalities. Civil War, 4 years, over 600,000 American deaths. COVID-19 started to hit our shores in December of 2020. So we are a little over 1 year from when it began. And we are over 500,000 American deaths, getting close to 600,000 American deaths. I went ahead and added the last statement. In 2019, we had a pretty bad flu season. We had 88,000 deaths in the country during that flu season. Again, we have had almost 600,000 deaths from COVID-related infections and complications as of last week. So this is not like the flu, not at all. And on top of that, people can spread COVID to each other without knowing it, without even having symptoms. Those of us who've had the flu and feel like we've been run over by a train, we know we have the flu. But that complicates COVID-19 transmission even further. And I'll mention one thing about also what Ms. Fields said, is that if we allow COVID-19 transmission and infection to continue, the variants will also increase. So we are in a race with the variants to get everyone immunized as quickly as possible so they don't have further chances to change and not be effective with the vaccine. I'll end there, and then I will throw the presentation over to Dr. Derrick Gray.
Thank you, Dr. Sharaf. I'm Dr. Gray. I always love to give a disclaimer to everyone before I start speaking. I am from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. So with that being said, if I say any word deep south, please forgive me. That is just my heritage. So if you hear the word y'all or anything else, please forgive me. I cover a lot of different places, which I've seen a lot of experience from the nursing home, work at both hospitals in regional and Northwest, also at our UMS clinic where we see outpatient and also in the urgent care setting. Also, I would like to say that I also have had contracted COVID myself and am a current long hauler. So this lecture is very important. I'm very passionate about this lecture. I'll be discussing about the Johnson & Johnson as stated, and I'll also go into some questions that I commonly have seen in all of those different locations that I've been working at. Next slide. So the Johnson & Johnson, as Dr. Sharif said, by the different names that it comes as, the big question that we're hearing about is the big pause. Everybody's concerned, what is going on? Right now, we don't fully know. That's the purpose of the pause. But here's what we do know. We do know that over 6 million people have received the Johnson & Johnson. Unfortunately, 6 people have contracted the cerebral venous sinus thrombosis. What we should talk about a little bit, I think somebody proposed a question about race. I don't believe when they do the research that we'll find race involved with the Johnson & Johnson. There are a lot of things that we do know. As Dr. Sharaf stated, that I've had personal patients and family who've had pulmonary embolism, who've had blood clots. One of my very first patients in a nursing home, we did not have him on any type of anticoagulation medication, and he had an MI. But when it comes to pulmonary embolism, there are medications, birth control, people who take long travels, recent surgery, or a person may have an underlying blood disorder. So I'm sure, again, the CDC is going to investigate all of these things. But what we also should know is that the Pfizer and the Moderna, there have not been any reported cases at all. Next slide. Here we have what's called the vaccine, to the left, the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System. This is a system that was created by the CDC and the United States Food and Drug Administration. This system has been around since 1990. It's nothing new. However, these 6 individuals who did receive the Johnson & Johnson vaccine was aware, and they had used the phone number, as you can see, the call number, the 1-800-822-7967. Also, there's an email where if you feel like you had a reaction, or when you do, or if you even have received the vaccine, the Pfizer, the Moderna, or the Johnson, this is a way where you can communicate this to get the information to the government or to the CDC. To the right, you see the V-Safe. You can take your personal cell phone, in which I just dropped mine, hopefully, still working. The CDC created here for your app, a smartphone, where you can just hold your phone up and you can try it right now. And when you have your vaccine, it will also be able to track you daily and ask you, how are you feeling? Or are you having such and such symptoms? So the V-Safe, for those people who have a smartphone, will be good for you, which I have a Samsung. Unfortunately, if you have a flip phone, you're gonna have to upgrade to I won't advertise either a Samsung or a Apple phone. Next slide. Now, why are we going through all of this in this big discussion today? It could be all in vain if we don't reach what's called herd immunity. The definition is occurred when enough people become immune to the disease to make it spread unlikely. As a result, the entire community is protected, even though those who have not themselves been immune. Herd immunity is usually achieved through vaccination, which we're trying to get the bitch pushed, but it cannot occur through natural infection. We must have the vaccine in order to reach herd immunity. If not, all of this will be in vain. We must all do our part, our neighbors, our communities, in order to reach herd immunity. The next question with Dr. Gray, what number is that herd immunity that we're trying to reach? Next slide. We're trying to reach approximately 80% of our population. As you can see, the United States population is approximately 330 million. We need approximately 250 million people. Every day, of course, the government is keeping track of these numbers, but if for those we know right now, we have to do better, we must do better to reach 80% to reach herd immunity. Next slide. Now, here are some common questions that people have asked myself and others to the panel. And so hopefully this is maybe something that you may be thinking or you've heard in your community. First question says, if I've had COVID, do I still need to get the vaccine? I had this question this weekend. I coach at AAU basketball and we traveled. And yes, I had a parent. I said, yes, you do, because we do not know how long the immunity you have. It was initially thought maybe 3 months, you may have 6. But currently our vaccines, the studies are still being evaluated, but we're almost looking up to 12 months. If I get vaccinated, could I then spread the COVID to my family? Again, no. But I also paused on this. If you're getting the Pfizer or the Moderna vaccine, this is also dependent upon if you've had your 2. Not just saying I had 1 vaccine and I shut it down. You must complete the process and get both if you're getting the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccine. Will the vaccine make me infertile? The answer to that currently is no. Actually, 23 Pfizer vaccine trials participants became pregnant after receiving the vaccines. As of today, the New England Journal has also published more data which they're following over 35,000 women who are currently pregnant. And right now we're seeing really good evidence, and they're following them through each trimester, the first, second, and third. And those studies are looking really good. Can I get the vaccine if I had a food allergy? Yes, yes, and yes. This is a very common question. We see this question with the flu vaccine as well. All those who are given the vaccine, whether it's by a doctor's office or a pharmacy, we keep things what's called EpiPens available in case you do have any type of reaction. That is the purpose of the 15 and 30-minute rule, where we watch you after you have the vaccine to make sure from a safety standpoint. If I have an autoimmune disease or a weakened immune system, can I get the vaccine? Yes. Remember, COVID is attacking mostly those people whose immune systems are weak, our diabetics, any HIV, or any other immune system. The vaccine is safe for those people who are immunocompromised, as Dr. Sharaf has stated. Which vaccines offer longer immunity? Currently, we don't know between the Pfizer and the Moderna and also the Johnson & Johnson. Still more studies must be done. Perhaps one vaccine is better for a certain population than the other. There was no studies when they initially did this to say, hey, let's put a trial to African Americans, Latinos, and whites. That's not how the trials were conducted. Currently, again, the vaccine is for all populations. Next slide. Will the vaccine keep people from spreading it to others? This morning, as I was getting ready, my 10-year-old who's in 4th grade stated, Dad, teacher says that he doesn't have to wear a mask anymore. However, we have to remember that even our young ones, our kids, my son, I told him that, yes, I know that your teacher's vaccinated, but even your teacher should continue to wear the mask, and you must wear your mask. Now, I drove off in my car this morning, and I said to myself, I hope he doesn't go to school tomorrow and do anything like Kevin Hart and said, my dad said. The COVID-19 cocktail, mixing different vaccine types. I've had this question, believe it or not, asked a lot of times. Please, no, there has been no studies mixing the two. The only time the CDC will recommend something like this, unless you were particularly our small rural areas where they ran out, which is not currently the case, of the vaccine. If they ran out of Pfizer and all they had was Moderna. But we shouldn't see people trying to drive around or try to mix the two and say, oh, I'm gonna boost my immunity. I'm gonna get one Pfizer, I'm gonna get one Moderna. You should already have the card in which you can present that. And also a smart thing would be is to take a picture of your card to keep in your phone in case you're traveling to have that information. Will booster shots, will I need a third shot? Currently, we don't know, but right now it is looking like we'll probably all be getting another shot once we complete it in 12 months. But again, this has not come out yet, but that should be down the road pretty soon. Can I get the vaccine if I've had a severe reaction with another vaccine? Again, you should talk to your physician about this. Again, we will have those people already available with epinephrine if we need to inject. You have to weigh your situation, your environment, your work environment, your home environment to your exposure to COVID. Next slide. Can I get other vaccines with my COVID vaccines? Currently, what we like for people to do is wait at least 2 weeks. If you want the shingles vaccine, your pneumonia vaccines, we like for 2 weeks. The reason behind that is, what if you had a reaction? Do we know, was it from the pneumonia vaccine or was it from your Pfizer vaccine? However, this week I had my own case. It always throws a curveball. We're still trying to learn. I was just showing this as a picture of a patient I had with a needle in their foot. And the reason I put that picture there is because this is a tetanus. In this case, tetanus will outweigh that I need to give this person a tetanus shot, even though this person has just received the COVID vaccine, the Pfizer vaccine, and we were just monitoring closely. But for most instances, you should wait at least 2 weeks. Should I still get the COVID vaccine if I currently have COVID or I'm in quarantine? You must wait until, again, you're out of your quarantine period so we don't put others at risk and exposure. But once you're past that, then to please call and try to schedule your vaccine as soon as possible. And it's already stated, even though you've had COVID, you should still get vaccinated. What if I'm pregnant or breastfeeding? And again, here is where we see the gynecology societies have released a statement recommending the COVID vaccine. But again, you should discuss these concerns with your OB or your primary care physician. As stated, the New England Journal is still currently following young women with over 35,000 and currently through this pregnancy. Next slide. Here, if you have not had your vaccine, where can I get my vaccine? Again, if you have a smartphone, you can hold your phone up and it will send you to a link to where you can find where the Pfizer, the Moderna vaccines. Again, currently the Johnson & Johnson is on pause to help you get that vaccine scheduled. So please, please, in order for us to reach herd immunity, we must all do our part. If you're afraid or scared, please seek a medical provider. As Dr. Sharaf said, don't go off of Google, or we call it in the community, Dr. Google or Facebook. Please seek medical attention and have that discussion. Next slide. And here's our list of references.
Hello, everybody. We have reached the Q&A session. My name is Emily Chamanivong. I am the program coordinator in the Walton Global Engagement Office. And we've already got a few questions, so I would like to go ahead and start with Cuckoo. She's got a couple of questions. The first one, if someone already received the Moderna, Pfizer, Janssen vaccine, did the antibody test will the result be positive? So if they've already had Moderna, Pfizer, Janssen, and the vaccine, and they've done the antibody test, will their result be positive after they've already had the vaccine?
So that's a really good question. So I'll take this one. I know that early on when COVID, the pandemic hit, there were a lot of labs that were offering this blood test, and their advertisement was, come get this blood test and we'll tell you whether you've already had COVID or whether you have immunity against COVID. What I want to do is I want to say that coronaviruses, and that's what COVID is, coronaviruses have been around for decades. They're actually, coronaviruses are the viruses that have caused our common colds for 100 years. They're usually really innocent viruses. And there's lots of different types that really they aren't harmful in any way. I think most epidemiologists, if you ask them what virus they predicted would be the next pandemic, they probably would have said flu. I don't think anybody was thinking coronavirus. The reason I'm saying this is because those blood tests were not specific to COVID-19. And what happened is these people would go, they'd get the blood test and it was positive. And unfortunately, in a lot of instances, they were giving this false sense of security, like this immunity passport, because they may have detected antibodies against coronavirus, but it may have been the antibody against the common cold coronavirus. You know, the antibodies were not specific to COVID-19. So I will tell you this, that the blood tests that are out there are really good from a scientific angle. They're really good for research. There's actually a faculty member actually on campus that is doing an awesome research with blood testing, just trying to look at the antibody and the kind of the prevalence of antibodies in our community. But these blood test results should not be used to make clinical decisions. So just because right now someone tells me, so let's say for instance, someone didn't get the vaccine and they go get a blood test because they want to see if they're immune. And then they come to me and they're like, well, you know what? I had COVID last spring and I just had my antibody test last week as positive. I'm not getting the vaccine. No, because again, the result is not specific to COVID-19 causing the pandemic. It could be from a cold you had when you were 15 years old or 10 years old. So we cannot use the blood test results to make clinical decisions. And so I just want to make sure that's really, really clear. We have the nose swab tests that can tell you that whether you're sick right now, and there's 2 types of those. But the blood test, it shouldn't be there. And let's say you got the vaccine and you went and you got a blood test and now it's negative. The reverse is true. It does not mean you did not respond to the vaccine. You may still very well have immunity. So I just want to make sure that people aren't putting a lot of, I don't know, that they're not using that as the sole reason for any type of clinical decision. So.
Can I just add right quick to that? We currently in the hospital, we do PCR on everyone. We're checking for the antigen. And also just a quick note to that is a lot of people come in for the quick rapid test. That is not a good test if you don't have any symptoms. That is not for those people who are about to get on a plane and need that test. You need a PCR if you don't have any symptoms. So that was just something quick that we're dealing with in the community. The rapid tests are for those who are symptomatic. But if you don't have symptoms and just need a screening test, you should get the PCR test. And those are changing pretty rapidly on how fast we get those back.
Great, thank you both. We also have another question from Cuckoo, and this is, do you know if the blood clot cases regarding the Janssen recipients are more prone to certain races? And I think you touched on this a little bit earlier, Dr. Gray.
Right. They're still investigating. And again, unfortunately, I don't know the 6 races that are involved. But again, I'm sure in most cases that we've done in our studies that blood clots are not attributed to race.
And just to follow up to going back to that first question, Cuckoo wanted to know, or she stated that the biology department is doing research on antibody tests related to coronavirus. And she's just wondering if the people have positive results, if they have positive results and if they already received the COVID vaccine. Do they need to do a PCR test?
No. So what I'll say is that, yes, actually, we're familiar with the study, and I think there's a lot of good work there. But I would ask the people who are participating in the study to ask their questions directly to the research group. Right now, if they get a positive result, I believe some of the verbiage is this could be associated with immunity, but again, there's no definitive answer there. But again, I really would encourage them to reach out to the research group on campus. They're doing a lot of great work. Please, let's clarify about, I'm so glad that Dr. Gray mentioned that about the PCR and the rapid tests. So please know that both of these tests are used to detect infection. It has nothing at all to do with immunity.
Thank you. Okay, and now I'd like to move on. We have a couple of questions from Laura. Do we have a sense of what protection of Pfizer and Moderna is against the variants identified so far?
I think one, they're still studying those, but for right now, correct me if I'm wrong, panel, that the vaccine is doing pretty good from what the current studies are looking, but nothing has been finalized. And again, we're still seeing different mutations. So of course, it could be a long time.
No, that's exactly right. Actually, there was an article that came out, I think it was yesterday or today, and they're actually looking at breakthrough infections. What a breakthrough infection is that someone who's fully immunized, and then 2 weeks again after their last dose of vaccine, that's the definition of being fully immunized, that they're again having a COVID infection from a variant. And thankfully, they're not finding very many of these cases. And in these cases, the symptoms are extremely mild. So these people are not being hospitalized. They're not reporting to emergency rooms. So they really feel that the evidence currently is really strong that they're effective against the current variants.
I think another thing that I want to mention in the university community here, we are still testing people who are completely immunized if they are having symptoms. Like they will be able to come to the clinic and, well, right now we're still at the Garland Garage. They are tested. If they do come back positive and they've already had and they should be completely immunized, then we will do a PCR test, and that will be sent to try to find out if there is a variant that's causing it.
Thank you. And one last question from Laura. Also, is it okay to take Tylenol after getting the vaccine, or could that in any way diminish the vaccine's effectiveness?
Great question. No, it's like all other vaccines, we always tell patients and kids when they got their vaccines that you can take Tylenol if you have a fever. So no way does, as Dr. Sharaf did in her well documentation, her picture of the nucleus and everything, that the Tylenol doesn't hinder that. It doesn't work in that way. But great question.
Thank you, Dr. Gray. And now we'll move on to a question from Bonnie. Is there a definitive source for advice on whether people who have had GBS should get the vaccine?
So what they're talking about is Guillain-Barré syndrome, and it is a very, very rare complication. It affects your nerves. Very, very rare complication associated with other types of vaccines as well. What I would say right now is basically discuss that with your primary care physician. There's no specific guidelines, but with everything, you have to weigh the risk and benefits. So it really depends on you. I mean, what is your medical history? Do you have any chronic medical problems? If you do get COVID-19, are you at risk for having complications? And so you might find that the risk for you may not be worth the benefit, or it may be vice versa. But again, it's definitely a conversation you need to have with your primary care physician.
I will say I've also managed 2 patients at regional who've had COVID and then later had Guillain-Barré.
Thank you both. Now I'd like to move on to a question from Vicky, and I think we touched on this topic a little earlier. When will we know when we need to get the booster shot?
Good question, because we don't know. Pfizer released a statement, I think it was a week ago, stating that they thought that those who had received Pfizer doses would likely need to have a third booster within 12 months. But again, nothing definitive. So just like with all of this COVID pandemic, right? So every day we get new information, we get new data. Every week we get new information and new guidance. And so it's no different than with this. Obviously, we all really hope that the immunity from the vaccine will last more than a year, but we don't know yet. And I'll also say, if the variants continue, right now the mutations are small, and so the vaccines are effective against them. But if they change in larger, more significant ways, then we'll have to maybe readdress or maybe restructure the vaccine in some way. And it might end up being like a flu shot. But the faster we can get everybody immunized, the faster we get majority of our populations immunized, we will stop transmission and decrease the likelihood of any more variants forming.
Thank you. That was actually the last question we had in the chat, but I would like to invite anyone that has anything on their mind or anything that they would like to say or share, questions, please do so. You can put that in the chat.
I will tell you, and I know the panel feels the same way, that I am honored to have been invited to sit on the panel and honored to be with these other 2 medical providers, and so happy that Danielle and OEOC, that they really knew that this was important, and to get the information out to our campus and then hopefully to the community at large, and trying to maybe those people who might be on the fence with the vaccine. I hope that maybe we've given enough information and enough reassurance today to maybe sway you to go ahead and make the appointment to get vaccinated.
Well, Dr. Sharaf, Dr. Gray, Ms. Dana Fields, I do appreciate you all today, and it doesn't look like we have any questions coming in from everyone. Um, but what I would like to say, and if it's okay to put the others back on spotlight, if it's okay, I always like to call for final comments and questions, because sometimes you may think of something that has come up based on questions. So I would say, Dr. Gray, if you have any final last words, then Dr. Sharaf, and then Dana, I want to just make that last call for any comments that you may have.
No, I think again, we just all have to do our part, and it shouldn't just stop with us, encouraging our colleagues, encouraging our family members, and just continue to do due diligence and do our own research. And again, this is what the purpose of this forum is, to get educated. As I'll say, I appreciate everyone. I appreciate the invite for being here today. And I still would advertise that we still wear our mask as well. So thank you.
I'm sorry, Dana, I don't mean to interrupt you, but as we were talking, we had a couple of more questions coming in.
That sounds good.
People coming in. So, and Emily, if you want to go ahead and take that back on, go ahead.
Yes, so the first question we had come up is just a clarification. If we received 2 doses of the Pfizer vaccine this year, when will they come up with guidelines for a booster? Will we be steered towards staying with the same vaccine later?
Again, at this junction, we don't know, but it is looking like we will need a booster, but we don't know when and how that is going to be rolled out and made as well. But right now, it is looking like it, but there's no definitiveness yet, because we're still trying to learn how long this current vaccine is going to last.
Thank you. Okay, and then the next question, they've heard someone say in the store the other day that they had a blood transfusion from someone who have had their shots, so she didn't need to get one. Does this sound right? Can you confirm?
All right, so I'll talk about this one. What they're talking about is there's a treatment, and it's called monoclonal antibody treatment. And it's for groups of people, typically older, but those with really serious symptoms. And, their description is really good. Actually, what it is an infusion. What happened is someone was infected. They recovered, they're fine. And their body developed that antibody army against COVID. And so that person donated their antibodies. And so this became a treatment option kind of towards the middle of the COVID pandemic for those that really had some serious illness. They weren't in the hospital yet, but they were headed that way. And physicians could order this treatment, typically administered through a hospital. Washington Regional was doing this and still is doing this, and administer these antibodies that basically they give the antibody to that person that's sick and automatically gives them the army of antibodies to fight the virus. And it has had great success in minimizing, lessening these symptoms and keeping people out of hospitals and ICUs if given early enough in the infection. So it was actually a great treatment option. It continues to be a great treatment option. But to answer the question, no. It does not mean you do not need the vaccine. Now, what they may say is that, let's say you got it, maybe you should wait 90 days and then get your vaccine after that 90-day period, because obviously they want your body to have a really good immune response to the vaccine. But no, those people should still get vaccinated.
Thank you, thank you. We've had another question come up about a booster, and Dr. Gray, I think you've already touched on this, but I just want to go ahead and put the question out there. Do you know if a booster will be required every year, like the annual flu shot?
Yeah, like you said, we've touched on it. Just don't know when. But of course, right now we're going into the summertime. We'll still also be focused in the wintertime about the flu vaccine, because we're still having that push to make sure that we get our flu vaccines when the wintertime comes. But I don't know, again, like we talked about in the presentation, if they do come out with a booster, that you'll still have to wait 2 weeks at that time. But I don't anticipate any any booster in the immediate future this spring, possibly this summer. Again, we're looking at maybe this time next year if we're looking for a booster, depending on when you got your shot.
Okay, that was all of the questions in the chat, but as Danielle mentioned, we are scheduled to go to 1, so we do have time for any questions if any of our audience has any more.
Well, again, this is Danielle. So back, I guess, kind of running back to me, but I'm going to ask a question to our panel, just from a personal perspective. So if and maybe there's not a difference, but if there was a choice, maybe I shouldn't ask this. This is more of a medical, I guess. I don't know. I'm just going to ask it. Is if you had a choice, is there a difference really between the vaccines that are there? I mean, if you had a choice to wait to get Moderna versus the Johnson and Johnson or Jensen, or the Pfizer, is this where you would say take any of the three, or does it matter as long as you take something?
You answered the question, Danielle.
Okay. Okay.
You take what's available. I mean, it'll give you, all of them are going to give you, I mean, obviously now Janssen's on pause, and again, they may come out with some further guidelines regarding administration, but whether you're offered Moderna or Pfizer, just take either one of them. But again, you start with one, you finish with one. So just, Moderna, you see your second Moderna. And then I'll say this, it was a great segue to Danielle. So at Pat Walker Health Center, we, since we had to pause our Johnson & Johnson, or AKA Janssen vaccines, we were actually able to get Pfizer doses this week. And so we have started to administer Pfizer vaccine through our clinic yesterday, as a matter of fact. And so again, all you have to do is call. The number is 479-575-4451. Again, 575-4451. All you have to do is call. Again, it's open to spouses of students, faculty, and staff. When they talk to you, when our front desk schedules your appointment, they'll try to also go ahead and schedule your second appointment for your second dose. And so, I mean, it can't get much easier. We have them on campus. And so please, like I said, if you're on the fence and you've decided to go ahead and get the vaccine, give us a call and you'll come through our AIT clinic. I know, Danielle, you asked for 2 last things. I already talked too much already, but 2 more things. Again, the vaccine does not have live virus. There are vaccines out there like MMR and things like that where people with weak immune systems can't get it. COVID vaccines do not have live virus. They will not make you sick. And even if you have a weak immune system, you can still get the vaccine. And the flu season, I've been practicing medicine now for 21 years. And this past flu season was by far the lightest flu season we have ever encountered. So much so that I believe even Washington Regional, usually every flu season, they have multiple admissions for people that have complications related to the flu. I don't think they admitted anyone. And if they did, it may have been one person. And people are like, why do you think that is, Dr. Sharaf? I'm like, well, because masks work. And people weren't crowded. They weren't going to crowded places in the middle of winter. And people were wearing masks around each other. I truly believe that is the reason why we had such few flu cases this year. I'm sorry, I had to say that too, Danielle.
No, you're absolutely fine. Absolutely fine. And actually, as you are giving additional comments, we had another question come in, Emily.
Yes, we did. Once you've taken a vaccine, even if there is a booster later, will you always need to stay with the same vaccine?
Again, good question. Again, that has not been studied. Again, I'm sure though, however, this depends at that time if you got a Moderna. And again, we're looking at 12 months of separated from that time, and there's only Pfizer available in your community. I can't say 100% sure, but it would be okay probably to get the Pfizer vaccine at that time. But again, go ahead, Dan.
I'm sorry, what I do want to add though, that may be an exception if you had a serious reaction to one of the vaccines. For example, I had a patient who had the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, and there's this thing called polyethylene glycol is in it, which is the same thing that's in a laxative. But she ended up having a mild reaction, and then when she took the medication, she didn't have a adverse effect to the vaccine, but she took the medication that is the same ingredient that's in the vaccine, so she can't have that vaccine again. So she will have to switch to a different vaccine the next year.
Danielle, I laughed at your original question because I had patients say, I want the same injection that Mike Pence received on TV. That works. If the president got it, that's the real one. And I don't want anything else. I'm glad you brought that up.
No, I know sometimes depending on, who our circle of influence is or who we trust, we sometimes are more aligned with doing what they do. So that I think that's one reason why I wanted to ask that question. I too was one of those who had to, and Dr. Gray, Dr. Sharaf, Dana will tell you, we talked about it. I too had some resistance when it came out, but after talking with them, I mean, they gave me some valuable information for me to make my decision to go ahead and move forward with it. So I do appreciate them providing that guidance and information to me, and of course to our community as a whole. And I know we're getting towards the end of our time. One thing I wanted to do, I know Dr. Gray has made some comments, final comments, and so has Dr. Sharaf, but I want to make sure that Dana, if she has any final comments or anything she'd like to share just based on our conversation today.
The only thing I want to do is thank you again for allowing me to be on this panel. I just think I'm so grateful that I work for a university that realizes that underserved, underrepresented communities matter, that it counts, and that this is a very important topic. So thank you for allowing us to just have this forum for everyone who's underrepresented on our campus.
No, absolutely. I think it takes all of us taking a concerted effort to be educated about these things so we can all make our own informed decisions. So, and Emily, I don't see any other questions coming in.
I don't either.
You don't either.
No.
So what I'm just going to go ahead and just kind of make some final last comments and just give special thanks to our panelists, Dr. Gray, Dr. Sharaf, Ms. Fields. We appreciate your time and energy and expertise for being and taking busy schedules today. And also I appreciate Laura Jacobs and Wayne Bell in OEOC for helping to facilitate this conversation today virtually. There's always technical concerns, but we try to make sure we overcome those. And I know I've had a few questions in chat about, again, when the link is going to be provided. So we're going to ensure as soon as Zoom accomplishes it for us, we're going to just give you notice on where you can go and get the recording. So you'll be able to look at it and share it or revisit it whenever you have an opportunity. So I appreciate everyone taking time out of their schedule to attend today. I think it was a good conversation, and we hope that you think about all the information that was provided here today, and feel free to share that with your friends, your family, your colleagues across the nation. I would say in the campus community, but across the nation. So again, thank you so much. Stay safe, stay healthy, stay encouraged, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.